The gavel's sharp crack echoed through the silent courtroom, sealing what everyone believed was just another open and shut case. The patrol officers sat with satisfied smirks, convinced they had successfully put an innocent man behind bars through their perjured testimony. They had no idea the man in shackles was no ordinary defendant. He was a federal agent, and their carefully constructed lies were about to collapse in front of everyone. Rain poured relentlessly from the night sky, turning the cracked asphalt of West Bridge's industrial district into a dark, reflective mirror. It was the dead of night, the kind of hour when only those running from the law and those hunting them were still awake. Special Agent Julian Hale belonged to the latter, though nothing about his appearance suggested it. For nearly a year, he had lived deep undercover, infiltrating a mid-level narcotics syndicate operating out of Pennsylvania. On the streets, he was Marcus Bell, a quiet, efficient logistics man who moved product in a battered 2014 Chevy Malibu. To the FBI, he was the linchpin of Operation Iron Grip, a multi-agency task force on the verge of dismantling a network that stretched across 3 states. He was only blocks from his safe house when flashing red and blue lights suddenly filled his rearview mirror. Julian sighed, eased his foot off the gas, and guided the Malibu to the curb. He had been driving exactly at the speed limit. His turn signal had been on. His alias registration was current. There was no legitimate reason for a stop. Yet as he glanced in the side mirror and saw the silhouette of a Westbridge police cruiser, a cold knot of recognition tightened in his stomach. 2 officers stepped out into the downpour. Officer Preston Holt and Officer Shane Mercer. They carried a reputation in the precinct for treating the city's poorer neighborhoods like personal hunting grounds. Julian had read their files during an earlier corruption assessment. They were known for excessive force, questionable arrests, and sudden drug busts that always seemed to occur when their body cameras conveniently malfunctioned. "Keep your hands on the wheel, Marcus," Julian muttered, slipping fully into his undercover persona. Officer Holt approached the driver's side, shining a high-powered tactical flashlight straight into Julian's eyes. Blinding him, Officer Mercer hung back near the rear quarter panel, his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered weapon. "Window down." "All the way," Holt barked, voice thick with unearned hostility. Julian complied, the glass humming lower as cold rain swept inside. "Evening, officer. Was I speeding? License, registration, and proof of insurance. Don't make any sudden moves, boy," Holt snapped, ignoring the question entirely. Julian felt a muscle jump in his jaw at the slur, but he kept his face impassive. He moved his hands slowly and deliberately. "It's in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for it now. I didn't ask for a narration. Just get it," Holt growled. Julian handed over the forged documents. Holt barely glanced at them before sweeping the flashlight through the car's interior. There was nothing to see, only fast food wrappers, an empty coffee cup, and the smell of stale air. "Step out of the vehicle," Holt ordered. "Officer, why did you pull me over?" Julian asked, tone level and free of the panic they clearly hoped to provoke. "Broken taillight." "Now step out before I drag you out." Julian knew his taillights were perfect. He had checked the car himself only hours earlier, but arguing on a dark roadside with 2 adrenaline-fueled cops was a losing game. He unbuckled his seatbelt, pushed the door open, and stepped into the biting cold before his feet were fully planted. Mercer lunged from the passenger side, grabbed Julian by the shoulder, and slammed him chest first against the wet hood of the Malibu. The metal was freezing. "Hey, I'm not resisting," Julian said sharply, keeping his hands flat and visible on the hood. "Shut your mouth," Mercer snarled, patting him down roughly and kicking his legs apart. "Holt, check the car." Julian turned his head slightly, watching as Holt leaned into the Malibu. He didn't search. He tore the interior apart, tripping the glove box contents onto the floorboards, yanking up the floor mats, and violently shoving his hands under the driver's seat. Julian's mind raced. Hidden inside a magnetic lockbox welded behind the dashboard were his FBI badge, encrypted federal comms device, and true identification. If Holt found that box, Operation Iron Grip would die. The syndicate had eyes everywhere, and word of a Fed being pinched in Westbridge would reach the cartel leadership by morning. Julian would be burned, months of work destroyed, and his informants would be slaughtered. But Holt didn't find the lockbox. Instead, he emerged holding a clear plastic bag containing 2 ounces of white crystal and powder methamphetamine. Well, 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 Holt sneered, lifting the bag toward the street light. Look what we have here. Shane, looks like our boy here is trafficking. Julian stared at the bag. It wasn't his. It was a classic plant. Holt had palmed it from his own tactical vest while inside the car. That's not mine, Julian said, voice deadly calm. You planted that. Mercer grabbed Julian's wrist, twisted it violently behind his back, and slapped on a pair of steel handcuffs that bit painfully into the bone. Save it for the judge, scumbag. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it. As they shoved him into the back of the cruiser, Julian made a calculated choice. He could shout that he was a federal agent and demand they call his supervisor. It would stop the arrest immediately, but it would also generate a local police report that the cartel's moles inside the precinct would inevitably see. His cover would be blown. Or he could take the ride. He could let these dirty cops process Marcus Bell, post bail, and then dismantle them completely in court without compromising the task force's timeline. Julian leaned back against the hard plastic seat as the cruiser sped toward the precinct, city lights blurring through rain-streaked glass. You boys picked the wrong car tonight, he thought. I'm going to let you dig your own graves. Months later, the heavy oak doors of courtroom 402 in the Westbridge Municipal Courthouse swung open. Julian sat at the defense table wearing a crisp, understated charcoal suit. He looked nothing like the street-level courier he had played on the night of his arrest. Beside him sat Miles Corbin, a notoriously overworked public defender whose tie was crooked and whose briefcase looked as though it had survived a war zone. Corbin was sweating, nervously flipping through a manila folder containing Julian's fabricated arrest record. Look, Marcus, I'm telling you, he whispered frantically, leaning close. Ada Philip Grant doesn't lose. He's offering a plea 2 years probation, a felony on your record, and you walk out today. If we take this to trial, you're looking at a mandatory minimum of 5 years. The cops found the drugs in your car. It's their word against yours, and juries in this county love cops. Julian didn't look at him. His eyes were fixed on Ada Philip Grant, who was currently laughing at a joke made by Officer Preston Holt near the prosecution table. Holt sat in full dress uniform, brass-polished, every inch the pristine guardian of the community. Officer Shane Mercer smirked from the gallery. I'm not taking a plea, Miles, Julian said quietly. I'm entirely innocent. Innocence doesn't matter in room 402, Corbin hissed. Evidence matters. They have the drugs. Marcus, they planted them. You think Judge Langford cares? You think she hasn't heard that 1,000 times this year? Before Julian could respond, the bailiff shouted, All rise. Judge Margaret Langford took the bench. She was a stern, uncompromising woman with a reputation for clearing her docket without mercy. She peered over her reading glasses at the courtroom with a mixture of authority and utter exhaustion. Be seated, she ordered, shuffling papers. State of Pennsylvania versus Marcus Bell. Possession with intent to distribute. Mr. Grant, is the state ready? Ready, Your Honor, Grant said, standing and buttoning his expensive suit jacket. Mr. Corbin, how does your client plead? Julian stood before Corbin could open his mouth. Not guilty, Your Honor, and if it pleases the court, I would like to dismiss my appointed counsel and proceed pro se. The courtroom went dead silent. Corbin looked as though he might have a heart attack. Ada Grant let out a loud, mocking scoff. Judge Langford narrowed her eyes. Mr. Bell, you are facing serious felony charges. Proceeding without legal representation is highly ill-advised. You are not a lawyer. I understand the risks, Your Honor, Julian said smoothly, posture perfect, voice projecting clearly across the room. I waive my right to counsel. I will be representing myself. Langford stared at him for a long moment. There was something in his demeanor, a lack of fear, a composed precision that didn't align with the file sitting in front of her. Very well. It's your funeral, Mr. Grant, Call your first witness. The state calls Officer Preston Holt, Grant announced triumphantly. Holt swaggered to the witness stand, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. He settled into the chair with practiced ease. He had done this 100 times. Grant approached the podium. Officer Holt, can you recount the events of that night? Asterisk. Certainly, Holt said, looking respectfully at the judge and playing his part to perfection. My partner and I observed the defendant driving erratically on 4th Street. He was swerving over the yellow line. We initiated a traffic stop for a broken taillight and suspected DUI. When I approached the vehicle, the defendant was hostile, aggressive, and refused to comply with basic commands. Did you conduct a search of the vehicle? Grant asked. Yes. For officer safety, we asked him to step out. When he did, I illuminated the interior of his car and saw, in plain view, protruding from under the driver's seat, a large plastic bag containing a crystalline substance later confirmed to be methamphetamine. In plain view, Grant emphasized for the record. Yes, sir. Plain view. The defendant then became physically combative and we had to subdue him to effect the arrest. Thank you, officer. No further questions, Grant said, strutting back to his table. He shot Julian a pitying look. Judge Langford looked down. Mr. Bell, you may cross-examine the witness. Julian stood slowly. He carried no notes. He didn't stumble. He walked to the center of the floor and looked directly into Preston Holt's eyes. For a fraction of a second the officer's confident smirk faltered. Officer Holt, Julian began, voice calm and ringing with authority. You testified that my driving was erratic. Correct. That is correct, Holt said. And you pulled me over for a broken taillight. Yes. Officer Holt, isn't it true that a 2014 Chevy Malibu's taillight assembly is a single integrated LED unit? If the taillight were broken, the brake lights and turn signals would also fail to illuminate. Holt frowned. I don't know the exact mechanics of your car, Marcus. I just know it was out. I see. You also testified that I was hostile and combative, which prompted you to search the vehicle. Westbridge Police Department policy mandates that all patrol vehicles have their dashboard cameras activated during a traffic stop. Do you have the footage of my erratic driving and combative behavior? Holt cleared his throat. Unfortunately, the dash cam in our cruiser experienced a technical malfunction that evening. A malfunction, Julian repeated, letting the word hang in the air. How unfortunate. What about your body camera? Department policy dictates it must be active during all civilian engagements. Holt shifted uncomfortably. My battery died earlier in my shift. My partner's camera was also malfunctioning due to the heavy rain. So both cameras, the dash cam and the body cameras that could have corroborated your story completely, failed on this specific night at this specific time. Objection. Grant shouted, rising, argumentative, sustained. Judge Langford said, though she was now regarding Officer Holt with intense, critical scrutiny. Move on, Mr. Bell. Gladly, Your Honor. Julian took a step closer to the witness stand. Officer Holt, you swore under oath today that you found the narcotics in plain view, protruding from under the seat. That's right. I saw it plain as day. You are absolutely certain, under penalty of perjury, that you didn't plant those drugs, that you didn't violate my civil rights. Holt leaned forward, face flushing with anger. Listen to me, Marcus. I know what I saw. You're a drug dealer. We found your stash. I didn't plant anything, and I don't appreciate a criminal trying to drag my name through the mud in this courtroom. I just want to be absolutely clear. Officer, Julian pressed, voice dropping an octave and losing every trace of the street persona he had worn for months. The tone was pure, authoritative federal law enforcement. You are locking in your testimony right here, right now. I am. Holt spat. Julian turned his back on Holt and looked at the judge. The trap was fully sprung. Everly now sat on the official court record. Your Honor, he said softly, reaching into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. The defense would like to enter a new piece of evidence into the record, and I believe the prosecution is going to want to amend its charges. Grant laughed out loud. Objection. What is this nonsense? He's a pro-se defendant trying to introduce surprise evidence. Julian pulled a sleek black leather wallet from his pocket. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at Officer Holt, who was now staring at the wallet with a sudden, inexplicable dread creeping up his spine. It's not surprise evidence, Mr. Grant, Julian said. He flipped the leather wallet open and held it high for the entire courtroom to see. The fluorescent lights caught the gleam of the solid gold shield and the crisp federal ID card opposite it. My name is not Marcus Bell. I am Special Agent Julian Hale with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and Officer Holt just committed federal perjury in your courtroom. The silence in courtroom 402 was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a catastrophic explosion. For several long seconds nobody moved. Judge Margaret Langford froze, her pen hovering millimeters above her legal pad. ADA Philip Grant's mocking smile slowly dissolved into slack-jawed incomprehension. In the gallery, Officer Shane Mercer sat rigid, color draining entirely from his face as his eyes locked onto the solid gold FBI shield, catching the fluorescent lights. But it was Officer Preston Holt on the witness stand who looked as though he had just been handed a death sentence. His arrogant swagger evaporated. A thick bead of sweat materialized at his temple and traced a jagged line down his pale cheek. What is this? Grant finally stammered, voice cracking and stripped of its previous theatrical confidence. Your Honor, this is a forgery. It has to be a stunt. He's a street-level drug runner. Approach the bench, Judge Langford commanded, voice slicing through the tension like a scalpel. Now, both of you. Julian snapped the leather wallet shut and walked calmly toward the judge's bench. Grant scrambled after him, nearly tripping over the edge of the prosecution table. Julian handed his federal credentials up to the judge. Langford pulled her reading glasses down the bridge of her nose and scrutinized the holographic watermark, the embedded microchip, and the unmistakable seal of the Department of Justice. Special Agent Julian Hale, she read aloud, voice carrying a dangerous edge. She looked down at him. You have been operating under the alias Marcus Bell. Yes, Your Honor, Julian replied, tone respectful but firm. For nearly a year, have been the lead undercover operative in a joint federal task force operation iron grip targeting the distribution networks of a tri-state narcotics syndicate. My arrest by officers Holt and Mercer was an unanticipated complication, but one we decided to utilize to our advantage. Utilize? Grant hissed, face turning blotchy red. You wasted the court's time. You intentionally allowed a fraudulent prosecution to proceed to trial. I allowed corrupt police officers to perjure themselves under oath, Julian corrected sharply, turning his gaze to Grant. Officers who, according to our ongoing intelligence, are on the payroll of the very cartel my task force is attempting to dismantle. A collective gasp echoed from the gallery. Miles Corbin, the public defender, had slumped back into his chair, staring at the ceiling as though he had just witnessed a miracle. Judge Langford slammed her gavel down, silencing the rising murmurs. Officer Holt, you are still under oath, she said, glaring at the witness stand. I suggest you think very carefully about your next words. Holt was hyperventilating, hands gripping the wooden railing of the witness box so tightly his knuckles were bone white. I want union representation, he choked out, eyes darting frantically toward the courtroom exit. I plead the Fifth. It's a little late for the Fifth Amendment, Preston, Julian said, stepping back to the center of the room, especially when you've already locked in your testimony. But you shouldn't worry about the lack of body camera footage from that night. I brought my own. Julian reached into his briefcase and produced a sleek black encrypted flash drive. Your Honor, the 2014 Chevy Malibu I was driving is a federal fleet vehicle, he explained to the court. It is equipped with military-grade covert audio and visual recording devices. 2 4K pinhole cameras are mounted in the rearview mirror and the dashboard air vents. High-fidelity microphones are embedded in the headliner. Julian handed the drive to the bailiff. On this drive is the raw, unedited footage of the traffic stop that night. It clearly shows Officer Holt reaching into his tactical vest, producing a bag of methamphetamine. and tossing it onto the floorboard of my vehicle before falsely declaring it was in plain view, Holt lunged out of the witness chair, panic entirely overriding logic. "This is a setup. That's illegal surveillance. Sit down," Judge Langford roared, fury absolute. "Bailiff, secure the witness." Two armed court officers immediately stepped forward, placing heavy hands on Holt's shoulders and forcing him back into the wooden chair in the gallery. Officer Shane Mercer stood and tried to quietly shuffle toward the heavy oak doors, desperate to escape. "I wouldn't do that, Shane," Julian called out, not even turning to look at him, "unless you want to add resisting a federal arrest to your list of charges." Right on cue, the heavy oak doors of courtroom 400 to burst open. The courtroom was instantly swarmed. 6 men and women in dark windbreakers emblazoned with bright yellow FBI letters flooded the aisles. Moving with tactical precision, leading the charge was Special Agent in Charge Victor Lang, a grizzled, no-nonsense veteran who looked as though he had spent his entire career chewing nails. "Federal agents, nobody moves," Lang's voice boomed, drowning out the panicked murmurs. Asterisk. To agents bypassed the prosecution table and immediately flanked Officer Mercer in the gallery, kicking his legs apart and slapping federal steel around his wrists. Mercer didn't fight back. He simply dropped his head in defeat. Lang walked straight past the trembling ADA Grant and approached the bench, flashing his credentials to Judge Langford. "Special Agent in Charge Victor Lang, FBI, Your Honor. I apologize for the interruption of your proceedings, but we have federal arrest warrants for several individuals in this room. I am more than happy to accommodate you, Agent Lang," Judge Langford said, eyes blazing with righteous anger as she stared daggers at Holt. "It seems my courtroom has been used as a stage for a criminal conspiracy. It goes much deeper than perjury, Your Honor," Julian said, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with his commanding officer. "The methamphetamine that Officer Holt planted in my vehicle, we ran a chemical analysis and cross-referenced its batch signature. It wasn't just random street product. It was part of a major seizure made by the Westbridge Police Department 2 years ago." Grant's eyes widened in horror. "That's impossible. That evidence is locked in the 11th Precinct's secure vault." "Not anymore," Lang said grimly. "We audited the 11th Precinct's evidence logs this morning while this trial was commencing. The drugs Holt planted were smuggled out of the precinct's evidence locker, and there's only one man with the administrative clearance to override those security protocols without triggering an alert." Julian turned to look at the defeated, handcuffed patrolman. "Captain Harlan Doyle, your commanding officer." Holt squeezed his eyes shut, a pathetic whimper escaping his throat. The entire criminal pipeline was laid bare. Captain Doyle had been stealing confiscated cartel drugs, and his dirty patrolmen Holt and Mercer were putting them back on the street, occasionally using them to frame innocent civilians to meet arrest quotas and keep the heat off the real cartel operatives. "We arrested Captain Doyle earlier this morning in his driveway," Lang announced to the stunned courtroom. "Officers Preston Holt and Shane Mercer, you are under arrest for conspiracy to distribute narcotics, deprivation of rights under color of law, federal perjury, and obstruction of justice." The FBI agents dragged Holt out of the witness box. He didn't strut this time. His polished brass uniform suddenly looked like a clown costume. As the agents marched the disgraced cops down the center aisle, the silence of the courtroom was replaced by the heavy, satisfying clatter of chains. Julian turned to Ada Philip Grant, who was clutching his briefcase like a life preserver. "I suggest you review your caseload, Mr. Grant. Every single arrest Holt and Mercer have made over the last several years is about to be federally audited. If we find you willfully ignored their corruption to boost your conviction rate, we'll be seeing you again very soon." Grant swallowed hard, utterly speechless, his career flashing before his eyes. "Case dismissed with extreme prejudice," Judge Langford declared, slamming her gavel down with such force it echoed like a gunshot. "Mr. Bell, or rather, Agent Hale, the court thanks you for your service." Julian nodded respectfully to the judge. He walked over to the defense table, picked up his charcoal suit jacket, and slipped it on. Miles Corbin, the public defender, was still staring at him in awe. I told you I wasn't taking the plea. Miles, Julian said with a faint, knowing smile. Special Agent Julian Hale walked out of the courtroom, the heavy oak doors swinging shut behind him. The air in the hallway was no longer stale. It felt clear, sharp, and clean. The syndicate was crumbling, the corrupt brass was in chains, and the streets of Westbridge were finally about to see real justice. If this story of absolute justice and a flawless undercover operation kept you on the edge of your seat, give it a like. Corruption thrives in the dark, but it only takes one person willing to shine a light to bring the whole rotten system crashing down. Share this with your friends to spread the word that no one is above the law. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more gripping stories of justice served. Asterisk.